Hey everybody. Today we're going to be harvesting some wild lettuce. I'm going to forage for what I can find around our property, and we're going to pick it and make it into a pain medicine. We're going to go over a few different varieties that grow in our area and how to identify those. It is a lettuce, and it's a wild lettuce, but so you can eat it. But this time of the year right now, it's towards the end of July, and the plant leaves can become a little bit bitter. But it's the perfect time because as you can see, it's starting to go to flower. It's the perfect time to pick it for a medicinal purpose. Now these plants grow anywhere from 6 inches off the ground up to 9 feet tall, but I'll show you the different ways to identify them. Okay, here we have two different varieties of wild lettuce. This is called the tall blue, and this is called the Canadian wild lettuce. And this right here, just to show as a comparison, is a very large dandelion leaf. There's a lot of similarities, but the differences are a dandelion leaf comes to a stem that connects to the plant. Wild lettuce, the leaf actually comes all the way down to the stem and attaches to the central flower stalk of the plant. So you can still see this leaf that comes down and it connects along with the stem. Dandelion has more of a rounded top. Wild lettuce comes to more of a point, and I know these are very different, but they're both different varieties of wild lettuce. They do come to points. Now the other thing too is the underside of a dandelion is typically smooth, and the underside of an adult wild lettuce has very fine hairs or almost like needles to it, prickly. They don't feel prickly to your hand, but they're there. They're hairy, whereas a dandelion is not. Another way to identify the different varieties and to make sure it's not a dandelion is a dandelion grows in a basal rosette on the ground, and it has a central flower stem that comes up, but that flower stem does not grow leaves. Wild lettuce grows in a basal rosette, but when it shoots up after its first year of growth, a flower stem, leaves continue to grow around the flower stem all the way up the plant, all the way to the base of the flower head. In its first year of growth, it sits on the ground about 6 inches tall. These are younger leaves, and those are what you would see at the base of the plant. It doesn't shoot up a flower stem. These are leaves that you would use for like a salad or edible. They're a little bit sweeter, and the older leaves, although they have more of a latex in them, and the latex is what we're going to be using as a medicine. Now, dandelion also has a latex where if you break the plant, you'll see a white latex coming out of the break. It's almost like an Elmer's glue, and it's sticky. On wild lettuce, you also have a latex that comes out when you break it, little white beads that build up. Now, it's almost impossible to collect just the latex. So what we're going to do is collect the entire plant. That would be, you can collect from the root all the way up to the flowers, and we're going to blend it all down and try to extract just the latex portion that we need for our medicine. The smaller pieces also have latex, but in a much smaller quantity, and that's why they're not as bitter as the older plants. This is a typical tall blue wild lettuce found here in New England. This one here is about 4 feet tall, and you can see how the leaves rosette all the way around this hollow central stem that comes all the way up to a flower head. And we'll get a close-up here. If I break one of these leaves, you can see the white sap that's coming out. That's the latex that we're going to be after. This right here is a typical Canadian wild lettuce. You'll notice this one here is more green. It doesn't have those bluish reddish marks on the leaves, the leaf stems, or on the flower stem. That's why the other one's called tall blue. This one's called Canadian because it's found mostly up north. But again, these are the younger leaves at the top, very plain. These are the more mature leaves, and you can see that trident or javelin shaped leaf. And if I break the leaf, the latex on this variety comes out white, and as soon as it hits the air, it oxidizes to a tan or a light brown. But it's the same sticky white sap that we're after for our medicine. Okay, and very conveniently, I found two young plants right next to each other, this one being the tall blue variety, and I can tell that because the stems have this reddish blue tint to them. You can see a bunny's been chewing on this one. All the tips are chewed off. And this one here is the Canadian variety. And you can see the sharp edges coming to more of a javelin type point. But yes, right next to each other, these are both first year, I believe. Actually, this one here may be second. It does have a small stem. It's been mowed down by a rabbit, so it's really difficult to tell. This one here has no flower stem to it at all, so I'm going to say these are first year plants, and probably a lot more delicious to that rabbit. Okay, we're going to start collecting these so that we can start processing them down for our medicine. There's two different ways you can collect these. You can either pick all the leaves off individually, which is kind of a waste. You can pull the plant up by the roots. The roots don't go very deep. And the roots are also full of the same sap that we're after, so you can process the entire plant. If you want it to come back next year, because you like the location it's in, you can just take a knife and cut it at the base. If you leave the root stock, there's a good chance that it'll just come back next year in the same place. I just wanted to show an example of how tall wild lettuce can get. It typically can go up to 9 feet tall. So not all of them that you're gonna find are gonna be, 3 feet or 4 feet tall. Some of them are gonna be very large. And the larger they are, the more material you're gonna get off of it for processing. And by the way, it's not a sticky sap, but in the process, you're gonna get messy. Another way to use wild lettuce is as a temporary liquid Band-Aid. If you have a small cut or scrape, you can cut into the plant just a little bit and let me see if I can find a good spot. Cut into the plant and you can see the latex that's coming out. You can apply that to a cut, sort of like a liquid bandage. What that'll do is it has an antiseptic property. It also disinfects, and it will dry, creating kind of a liquid bandage along your cut, sealing it so you don't have to worry about getting any dirt or anything in there as an infection. Of course, when you get home, clean it up and put a real Band-Aid on there, but in the wild, this is a great way to take care of things to keep the dirt out. Although you can use the entire plant, including the roots, I'm gonna cut off all of the roots from the plants I've collected, and I'm gonna strip the leaves from the stem, and I'm gonna just break off the flower heads. I'm keeping the flower heads and the leaves. I'm gonna discard the roots and the stems. Although they do contain a lot of the sap, it's just not worth the effort because they're so woody this time of the year. Breaking these down in a blender is gonna be more difficult than it's worth. So we're just going with the leaves. I'll get all this stripped down and then we'll get back to you. I finished harvesting all the leaves off the stems, and I've put 9 trays in our Excalibur dehydrator to dehydrate. I also did another 5 trays in our backup dehydrator, and we're going to try something different. We've got 5 trays we're going to be putting into our freeze dryer. The first step that we need to do is dry our leaves, stems, flower heads, whatever it is that you're going to process. In our case, it's just the leaves and flower heads. Once those are dry, we'll move on to the next step. Okay, now that we have everything dried, the next step is to get it all into a blender. We're going to blend it up as not a powder, but at least broken up. And we're going to fill quart-sized jars, and then we're going to top that off with an alcohol. 90 proof or higher would be your best option, and we're going to let that sit for 24 hours. If you'd like to skip the alcohol portion because of personal, religious reasons, whatever, you can skip this part and move right into the boiling phase. It just won't be as potent. Using alcohol to extract what we need from this plant does make this a lot more potent and more medicinal. Okay, now that I finished blending it up, I'm just gonna fill my jars with this. It didn't have to be a powder, it just has to be broken up. That way more of what we need can be absorbed into the alcohol. So let me get my jars filled up and then we'll move on to the next step. Finished filling our jars, and we have roughly 1 quart of freeze-dried and maybe 3/4 of a quart of dehydrated, and I got 2 jars that amount. So the next step is to fill these with alcohol, just enough to cover the herb that we have in here. We're going to let that decant for 24 hours, and then we'll move on to our next stage. Okay, and while I add the vodka, which is what I'm using, you can use anything as long as it's about 90 proof or stronger. I'm going to debubble like I would with a canning recipe to make sure there aren't any air pockets in here. I want to make sure that the alcohol covers the herb that's in the jar. And once it's covered, that's about the right amount. And you can see I'm still getting bubbles out of here. Okay, and that's 1 jar done, and then we'll move on to the next. All right, I finished adding all of the alcohol to these, and we're going to give them 24 hours to sit, and that'll decant what we need from them. And then we'll move on to the next step. If you have to let them sit more than 24 hours because, you know, life gets in the way, that's fine. The alcohol is going to preserve everything we're doing here and prevent mold or anything from growing. So I'd say 24 hours to within a week, we're going to move on to the next step. For me, I'm going to hopefully get to this tomorrow morning. Okay, you can see the color difference between the dehydrated and the freeze-dried. What I'm noticing right away is the freeze-dried rehydrated much faster, so it absorbed the alcohol into the plant matter a lot quicker. So I'm hoping that gives us a better extraction. We'll find that out when the experiment's over. You can almost tell by taste which one is going to be stronger. But so far you can see that there is definitely a difference between the way they're rehydrating in these jars. And this is just a close-up to show how much alcohol we have in here, just enough to cover the plants. So they're still at the top, but they're all just covered in the jars. And here's the freeze-dried one. We're gonna put covers on these now, and we're gonna set them aside for 24 hours. And like I said, 24 hours to a week, and we'll come back and check on them and see how they're doing. Well, as usual, life got in the way, so it's been a few days, but our mix is ready, and we're gonna move on to the next step. That'll be putting this mix into a pot with equal amounts of water and simmering it for about 2 hours, stirring occasionally. And we want to do that at a simmer, so about 180 degrees or less. We don't want to bring this to a boil. What that's going to do is it's going to wash the medicine that we need from the plant material. After that, we'll be straining and moving on to another step. But first, I'm busy. I don't have time to put this in a pot and monitor it on the stove. So I'm going to put the mix into crock pots. I'll add equal amounts of water and I'll set that to a simmer. I'll just check on it throughout the day for the next couple of hours or so, stirring it, making sure everything looks good, and then we'll move on to the next step. It's been 2 hours and we've cooked it as much as I think we need to cook it. I'm going to now separate the liquid from the plant matter by straining it through muslin. And you could use either muslin, cheesecloth, or a very fine strainer, but what we want to do is just get all this plant material out, leaving just the liquid, and then we're going to put it back in these crock pots, or you can put it on the stove, and we're going to condense it down to a fairly thick consistency. You may want to let this cool down, because I'm going to be squeezing this out with my hands and you don't want to burn yourself. So make it bath water warm before doing this. Okay, now that I've got all the plant material into the muslin, I'm just going to lift this up and squeeze out as much liquid as I can from this. After all that work, you really don't want to waste any of this. Okay. So we've washed out the crock pot just to make sure there's no more plant matter in here. And I'm going to pour the liquid back in. Okay. And I'm going to do that with my other two. You may only have one, but for as much of this as you're doing, do it all at the same time. It just makes life easy. I'm going to take this, put it back in my crock pot, and we'll get it back on the heat. And when I'm done with the other two, I'll come back to you. Okay, we're kind of in the home stretch here. Now that everything has been strained off, I took all of the cast off, all of the plant matter, and just put that in our compost. Kind of looks like cow cud, if you know what that is, or grass trimmings. But all of that has been cleaned up, and we're down to our final liquid here. I'm going to leave it in the crock pots and just monitor this. We're going to try to evaporate off as much of the liquid as we can and get it down to a tar-like consistency. As this comes down though, you're really going to want to monitor it and make sure that you don't burn it or completely dry it out. And like I said before, if you're not using crock pots and you've got it on the stove, make sure this does not come to a boil or you'll just be killing the medicinal properties of it. You want to keep it at 180 degrees or lower. These crock pots go to about 130, maybe 140 tops. So I'm not too worried about burning it, but just make sure to come every now and then and stir it, check on it, make sure that it's not gone too far. And I'll bring you back when we're down to that final stage so that you can see what it looks like and what we're going to be doing with it to kind of wrap things up. Well, we finally finished. We condensed everything down, and from the 3 quarts of liquid we started with, we ended up with a total of 6 ounces. So it does condense down quite a bit. Actually, it was a little less than this. We added water to make it more usable. I'll explain that. Once you have it all condensed down, you want to move it into a jar, and depending on how it's being used, I'm going to be using it with a dropper, a little medicinal dropper with an amber bottle to help light from destroying the medicine here. This is a 4-ounce bottle. So out of the 2 quarts of dehydrated material that we made, I've got 4 ounces. I'll fill this bottle up, and this is about a year's supply for us. So it worked out. It doesn't look like much, but it's more than enough for us. The other 2 ounces, this is a kind of an experiment that we're trying this year. It was made from freeze-dried material, and I'm going to be adding this liquid to our freeze dryer and turning it into a powder. I'm going to see if it's more shelf stable, if it still maintains its potency, and if it's easier to take and easier to store in its powdered form. But maybe that I'll post about later. So as I said, I added water to this to thin this down. You can add alcohol if you want. If you add 80% or higher drinking alcohol, such as a whiskey or a scotch or a vodka, it'll last longer and it'll be more shelf stable. But if you don't like using alcohol in your medicines, or you don't use alcohol for whatever purpose, you can add water. You just have to store this in the refrigerator. It'll last about the same amount of time refrigerated using water. The medicinal compounds in this, we talked about it being a latex. The latex, I believe, is pronounced lactucin or lactucopicrin. Those are basically the medicinal elements or compounds within this plant that help relieve pain, help induce sleep. They help with asthma, coughs. It's a relaxant. So the benefits of it are it'll help you fall asleep. If you're in pain, it'll help relieve some of that pain, but it'll probably also make you fall asleep. It's very relaxing or sleep inducing. The side effect of that would be you're kind of loopy, a little lightheaded. Me and Marilyn joke about the NyQuil morning. When you take NyQuil at night, the way you feel in the morning, kind of loopy and lightheaded, that's how you feel when you use this. So you're not going to want to drive or use heavy machinery. You don't want to give this to children or to pregnant women. Use at your own discretion or at your own risk. I'm not telling anyone to go out and do this. This is just what we do. You can give it a shot if you want, but do your own research. We have a lot of information concerning this plant on our webpage under Foraging. So if you want to go there, there's a lot more information than what I'm giving here. I'm trying to remember to cover everything. If I did miss anything, go ahead and put it down in the comments below. We try to respond to every comment that's left. So if you have any questions that I didn't cover in this video and that aren't on our webpage, just leave them in the comments and we'll try to get back to you. I almost forgot to mention dosage, the one thing that most people don't talk about because it does vary from person to person and potency to potency. Because every time you make this, it's not always going to be exactly the same potency. It all depends on the plant. It all depends. There's a lot of variables. So it may be stronger one time you make it and weaker another time. What we usually recommend is start with your finished product. Start with 1/4 teaspoon. And you can either take that orally, which is not going to taste pleasant. It's very bitter. Or you can add it to a tea or a coffee or a drink just to help dilute it and make it a little easier to take. But start with 1/4 teaspoon, and depending on how you feel, giving it 15 to 20 minutes to see how it's working for you, you can increase that dosage up to, I probably wouldn't go over a teaspoon, but you can go up to 1/2 teaspoon or 3/4 teaspoon and just work your way up until you see what works best for you. What I like about these droppers is these droppers are 1/4 teaspoon. So it's easy to kind of dose out what we're going to be using. But you can use a measuring spoon or however. But that's where I would start with how much to use. You'd be surprised how quickly you do feel the effects of it. So like I said, hopefully I covered everything you need to know. Check out our website. We have quite a few things under Foraging. It's a free site. We maintain it ourselves, so we update it when we have a chance to. Under Foraging, we add the plants that we forage in our area, and I'm sure there's a lot that we haven't gotten to yet, but like I said, it comes with how much time we have available. Check it out. If there's anything that you'd like to see either in our foraging section or maybe us make a video on, leave it in the comments below. If it's something that grows in our area that we know about, we'd be glad to make a video and add it to our website. If we don't know about it, we'll probably mention in a video or on the website that it's something that we don't have a whole lot of knowledge about. But either way, leave us a comment. Check out our next video. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. That way you can be informed whenever a new video comes out. Until our next video, see ya. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy our videos and want to help us out, please like this video and subscribe. If you know someone who would like our videos, make sure to share, as this really helps our channel out. Again, thanks, and see you soon.